back to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's flagship podcast on the big and interesting stories in the region. My name is Amrin Zaman, and today I'll be discussing the terrifying escalation in the Middle East as Israel carries out what it calls a limited ground invasion in southern Lebanon against the Shiite group Hezbollah. The move came after Israel killed Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut on September 27. With much of its top leadership decimated, its communications compromised, and its reputation in tatters, how will Hezbollah respond? And what will its chief mentor, Iran, counsel? With us here to discuss Hezbollah's options and their likely impact on the region is Lina Khatib, an associate fellow at the UK think tank Chatham House. So welcome to our program, Lina.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
So, whither Hezbollah?
One thing is clear, even though Hezbollah itself may not see it. A return to how Hezbollah was before Israel's campaign against it is not going to be possible. I think Hezbollah, despite its mass losses, still thinks that it can recover after this war like it did in 2006. In 2006, it was a brutal war between Hezbollah and Israel. Hezbollah incurred huge losses, even though it declared victory afterwards. The reality, of course, was that the war ended in stalemate, but Hezbollah declared it as a victory and eventually managed not just to recover, but grow. And I don't think this is possible anymore. So having established this, there are two choices left for Hezbollah, which will not become clear anytime soon, but eventually this is where it will find itself. And the choices are either for Hezbollah to recognize that it has been weakened significantly and is unable to go back to the status quo, and so to maintain a role in Lebanon at the level of domestic politics, it would then need to be under the umbrella of the Lebanese state fully. And that is not something that Hezbollah has ever done, because Hezbollah always operates outside of the umbrella of the Lebanese state. So operating under the umbrella of the Lebanese state could take the form of Hezbollah basically disarming and becoming a political party like the rest of the political parties in Lebanon, or it could mean handing its arms to the Lebanese army and acting as a subset of the Lebanese army. And that still means answering to state authority. The second choice is for Hezbollah to continue resisting and pretending that it can just survive as is, but that will lead it to become a rogue actor. And if it becomes a rogue actor, then it becomes a spoiler in Lebanon. It will be an actor operating outside state security and state oversight, but this means it will basically become potentially regarded as a terrorist threat because it would be conducting operations that are not in line with state authority. And so if Hezbollah really wants to maintain a role in Lebanon long term, I think it needs to think carefully about whether it wants to become a rogue actor, because that would attract repercussions, not just from Israel, which I think does not want to see instability at its northern border, meaning in Lebanon, but also potentially then from the international community. And I say this because rogue actors usually kind of happen in this kind of context when groups feel that they need to assert their presence. And at the same time, Hezbollah still has a network around the world. And this network has in the past been used for international terrorism, and it's still very active in terms of illicit criminal activity. So even if Hezbollah is weakened in Lebanon, these networks remain at large. And so there is the risk that further down the line, these networks might become spoilers at the level of international security, not just domestic security in Lebanon.
Well, that's a very interesting choice of words. You speak of submitting to state authority and then or becoming a rogue actor. And one could argue that Hezbollah is both, that it is the state because it's so much more powerful than any other institution or group in Lebanon. At the same time, we can say quite easily that it's a rogue actor given the criminal activity that you just described, not to mention the acts of terrorism that it's carried out. So, first of all, if it chooses the first option that you described, what kind of state would it be submitting to? Because some would argue that Lebanon is so weak, that the state is so weak, that the armed forces are so weak. So how does that actually happen?
One of the problems in this context is that the Lebanese state has been weak, and Hezbollah has therefore been able to take advantage of this weakness. But we also have to remember is that Hezbollah itself captured the Lebanese state and has been part of engineering this weakness in Lebanon, and it has managed to do that because it is the only actor in Lebanon that has arms and has managed to use military might as political currency in Lebanon. It has actually not just used its declared victories against Israel to claim legitimacy as a defense actor in Lebanon, but also has used its weapons inside Lebanon to intimidate and sometimes assassinate its political opponents. And so we have a situation in Lebanon right now in which Hezbollah is the most powerful political actor and military actor. And Hezbollah, through sheer force, managed to compel the Lebanese state to give it legitimacy by recognizing it as a pillar for Lebanon's defense alongside the Lebanese army. And Hezbollah has actually quite regularly undermined the Lebanese army itself, including sometimes in actual live battles on the ground, in which Hezbollah would, in a way, let the army be exposed and at the same time present itself as the needed force to protect and strengthen the army. So to get out of this toxic dynamic, Lebanon can't do this on its own. It needs international support. There is already support for the Lebanese army from the United States and the United Kingdom at the level of training, some equipment, development of capacity, but this is not enough. What is needed is high-level international support for the Lebanese state so that it can regain sovereignty. And at the moment, even if Hezbollah is weakened vis-a-vis Israel, it remains the strongest actor in Lebanon domestically because it possesses arms. So if the international community rallies to Lebanon's side, this will enable the Lebanese state to try to rein in Hezbollah finally, which, as I said, it has not been able to do so far. So I think it's important to recognize that Hezbollah is currently both a state actor in some way because it has state legitimacy, but also a non-state actor because it operates entirely outside of state authority in Lebanon. And obviously, this is now very vividly illustrated in devastation for Lebanon. Lebanon can't afford to continue, in this way. And this is obviously not in the interest of anyone interested in regional security in the Middle East either.
Well, it's very interesting, of course, that this is happening in a country like Lebanon, which is very sort of fractured ethnically and in sectarian religious terms. And so you don't have the kind of unity that you do in Gaza. So in that sense, the fact that all this devastation is being wreaked on Lebanon as a result of the actions of Hezbollah probably, I think, alienates people more than it alienates the Palestinians in Gaza from Hamas. Could we draw that conclusion? And in that sense, does that make the task of reining in Hezbollah easier precisely because there is less popular support? Or is this devastation actually just making people even more hostile towards Israel and therefore to some extent rallying around Hezbollah? How is that playing out?
The situation in Lebanon is definitely complicated. It is complicated because I would say a third of the Lebanese population supports Hezbollah. Most of this third happens to be the Shia community that sees in Hezbollah its only political and security representative. But the problem is that now, even for this community, with Hezbollah's great military losses vis-a-vis Israel, this role of Hezbollah as a protector is kind of proving not to meet expectations. At the same time, Hezbollah has, for this community, been for decades a provider of basic services. But again, even now, in the context of displacement of huge numbers from this community, mainly in southern Lebanon, where this community mainly resides, as a result of Israeli military action against southern Lebanon, Hezbollah has not been able to provide basic services for a number of reasons. One of the reasons being the communications network of Hezbollah having been infiltrated by Israel, and therefore Hezbollah is worried about operational repercussions were it to try to mobilize, to deliver services. And so this community has been left feeling, I think, quite vulnerable right now. But this does not mean that they are going to change their stance towards Hezbollah, especially if they don't see a political alternative moving forward. And so for as long as the status quo in Lebanon remains as it is politically, this community is going to rally behind Hezbollah no matter what. And so what is needed is national unity in Lebanon and reassurances by the politicians ruling the country that the country will act in the national interest regardless of who is actually there in terms of who gets services, whose voice is heard. And this is something that Lebanon, to be honest, has not managed to do since the end of the civil war. So it's something that, again, the international community needs to help with. National reconciliation in Lebanon never really happened in the way that it should have after the civil war. And again, what is happening now is partly a result of that. And when it comes to the rest of the country, they are against Hezbollah. But one of the glimmers of hope is that even Hezbollah's opponents are not celebrating publicly Hezbollah's weakening by Israel right now. They are being very careful about not dragging Lebanon to another civil war. And I think this is a sign of maturity, that they, know that they can't say, for example, that they are relieved that Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, has been killed by Israel. Even if deep down they may feel that way because Hezbollah may have assassinated someone from their political party or even a member of their families. And I think this level of responsibility is important, because doing otherwise might just fuel sectarian tension in Lebanon. And so Lebanon right now, I think, is in a very sensitive situation when it comes to the potential for domestic instability to happen. And I will add to this that, again, another positive sign is that the Lebanese army has been deploying in areas that have seen some, clashes on the streets between people who have been displaced and who happen to be armed, and people, just from the host communities, if we can call them that. But at the same time, now Israel has expanded its military attacks in Lebanon, the airstrikes, in areas that are not just Hezbollah strongholds. There have been attacks in areas that have mixed residents from different sectarian backgrounds. And so now the situation is beginning to shift so that people are seeing that the threat can actually happen anywhere. And although there is a lot of disagreement with Hezbollah's involvement in this war amongst most of the Lebanese people, this, of course, means that the people will just want Hezbollah to stop. But at the same time, there is rising anger against Israel because it is also seen as the aggressor, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people will, rally again, around Hezbollah. I mean, of course, some public sentiment has been kind of more sympathetic to Hezbollah. But I think as things stand at the moment, this sentiment is shifting to disagreement with Hezbollah, but also anger at Israel. A ground invasion would be devastating. It would actually be a quagmire for Israel because it would be entering territory that's very familiar to Hezbollah. And here I'm talking about the asymmetrical war scenario, whereby Hezbollah has had almost 2 decades of experience in during the time of Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon in the 80s and 90s. The fight was basically on the ground between Hezbollah and Israel. So this will be quite, I think, costly for Israel, but it would also be devastating for Lebanon. And the community in the south not only went through 2 decades of occupation, but also lost a lot in the 2006 war. And the last thing they want is to lose again with this current scenario, especially that this time Iran is not as flush with money as it was in 2006 to be able to compensate people. Arab countries in the Gulf are not going to send aid on tap like they did in 2006. And so the people of the South in particular, I think, will find it very difficult to see how they can recover from the devastation that a ground invasion would bring. So everyone in Lebanon, I think, is deeply concerned about seeing a repeat of 2006, and this goes, wider than just the people of the South. I mean, they will be mainly affected, but a ground invasion means all-out war, and with all-out war comes devastation across the country. And so while the people of the South will be the most affected, the rest of the communities will also be affected. And so in a way, it's not so much about tension between communities kind of growing as a result, but it's the kind of domino effect of what mass devastation in a country that's already on the brink will do, which can lead to lawlessness regardless of sectarian issues. So in a way, the kind of sectarian makeup of Lebanon does not help.
This brings us to my final question. You mentioned Iran, and of course, Iran has tremendous influence over Hezbollah. And so if we consider the second option that you said Hezbollah had, one of confrontation, how would that affect Iran?
If Hezbollah eventually does not agree to operate under the state umbrella in Lebanon, this decision will have been taken with Iranian agreement, because that would be a big decision for Hezbollah. And in that kind of scenario, it will be Iran basically deciding that the only way it can have influence is through being a spoiler. And so it all goes back to what Iran ultimately wants to see in terms of its role in the region. So when we talk about choices for Hezbollah in Lebanon, by extension, we're also talking about choices for Iran in the Middle East.
And what is the likely choice?
Iran, I think, eventually will recognize that it is not as powerful as it thinks it is. It still has many irons in the fire right now. Its position in Iraq is not as strong as it used to be, mainly because of growing disagreements amongst the various militias and political entities present in Iraq. The Houthis in Yemen are not as strong as they thought they are because they have incurred significant losses because of Israel's attacks on Hodeidah. Russia and Iran remain in competition in Syria, and now we're seeing Hezbollah weakened. Of course, Iran is not going to suddenly give up on all these investments across the region. But I think eventually Iran will recognize that it is weakened, and it remains an open question which path it will take. We have to remember that it's not easy to reverse course for a regime that has been in place for several decades, pursuing a very clear strategy in a very kind of systematic way. So it's an open question. International actors need to step in. It's not just Israel that is going to show Iran that it is weak and transform the balance of power in the Middle East. International actors need to capitalize on the vulnerability of Iran's proxies in the region to steer Iran to a different direction using diplomacy. And this means not ignoring the role that Iran is playing in its regional interventions and the destabilization that this is causing in the Middle East.
But you need to, of course, provide some carrots, like, putting the nuclear deal back on the table, sanctions relief, something, I imagine, for that to happen. And right now, the United States is very busy with its own presidential election, which, of course, allows Israel to do quite a bit of what it's doing right now in this vacuum. Anyway, gosh, so much to unpack here. Lina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the conversation.
And this brings us to the end of this episode of On the Middle East. Do go to our website, www.al-monitor.com, for more in-depth and independent reporting on the Middle East. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.